Yeah, FABA, for advisors by advisors. Hosted by Evan J. Mayer, where the real ones talk business, no filters, no favors. How they structure, they practice, how they build their team. Independent route or employee machine. Talk platforms, payouts, culture and growth. What really works when you out there on the road? No can lines, just advisors being straight. Real conversations from the people who relate. Double podcast for advisors by advisors.
This is For Advisors by Advisors. I'm your host, Evan J. Mayer, and today we have a very special guest in Mr. Jamey Eisenberg. Welcome.
Wow, I mean the J in the name and the soundboard. I'm excited.
It's all legit. He was Ellsberg, by the way, in New Smyrna travel baseball tournament this weekend, which is funny.
Yes,
because he never corrected it. He kept going.
The guy was having a rough day.
Absolutely. Jamey, this is a little bit of a different show than normal. This has nothing to do with finance. So if you only tune in for finance, stay tuned because this will be an interesting one. Jamey is the senior fantasy writer for CBS Sports, a recognizable voice in South Florida sports for a long, long time. Love to know a little background history. Today, you focus primarily on fantasy football, correct?
Yes.
In the past, it wasn't fantasy football. It was interviews, things along those lines. Can you take us a little bit of your past experience getting into the business, what you did, what were some cool experiences?
So I covered the Florida Gators at the University of Florida, where I went to school. We had a great school paper called The Alligator there. While I was there, I was also kind of interning for the Palm Beach Post, so it gave me an opportunity to do some work with a professional newspaper at the time. But being around that program, you're Steve Spurrier, Danny Werfel, Tim Tebow, all those, some recognizable names that you might know from Florida. So got a chance to be around a very reputable program and a lot of, top tier athletes. So that kind of prepared me for, I think, more so than probably school. Don't listen to this if you're my kids. But, prepared you for real life right away. From there, I went to a small newspaper here that's no longer in existence in Boca Raton.
Did you graduate? You already graduated Gainesville when you stayed in Gainesville?
No, I did this while I was in school.
Okay. So this was during what, like Javon Curse days? I don't want to age you too much.
Javon Curse, exactly, yeah. So I graduated from Florida in 98, stayed there through 99 just to continue, being around the team. That was the Mike Miller-led basketball team. So, got a good run there for the Final Four. And then I went to a small newspaper, the Boca Raton News, but it was great because it gave me the opportunity to cover a lot of the local professional teams. I covered 2 Super Bowls while I was there, covered the Dolphins, Dan Marino's last season. For example, the Jimmy Johnson debacle, 62-7, losing to the Jaguars. As a Dolphins fan, Evan, you should know that.
I do.
And then from there, I went to the Palm Beach Post. I was there for about 5 years, and 3 years. Got a chance again to kind of be the backup beat writer for the Dolphins, the Marlins, the Heat, kind of bouncing around a little bit. And while I loved it and gave me a lot of great opportunities, I was a little frustrated just not having an opportunity to focus on something. So job at CBS opened up. It was in Fort Lauderdale, so I got a chance to stay here. My wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, she was finishing up her turn at Florida, her time at Florida, and moving back to Boca Raton. So was just trying to stay local if I could, and kind of worked out. And so got a chance to jump in at CBS, and really was looking to just get a foot in the door, and then maybe get back to doing more traditional journalism. I'd always been good at fantasy football. I love the NFL. And I kind of took a little bit of my background and made it into, kind of what my career is now, which is talking to athletes, talking to coaches, talking to players, people around the league, and sort of bringing a little bit different feel to it. So, I know obviously you talk probably numbers a lot. While I obviously delve into the statistics part of my job a lot, I tend to look at the personal side of it, the intangibles, things like that. Is kind of how I approach my job. So,
would you say that makes you stand out differently than your peers?
Probably not as much today as it did when I first started, because today I think we get a lot more access to it used to be you had to be part of a pretty legitimate organization to get coverage. In covering games, covering leagues, going to practice, et cetera. It's still kind of like that, but I think they give a little bit more leniency to some of the blogs that have started and that changes, I think, a little bit how people have approached it. Plus, the access now from Twitter, X, social media, et cetera, you can sit at home and get those same interviews that I would have to do the legwork for.
Sure.
So But yeah, I think that kind of made me stand out a little bit. And,
So you've been doing fantasy for how long now?
Since 2006.
Okay, so that's 20 years. I mean, back when fantasy football, you had to get together and have a draft in person.
No, we CBS was pretty much ahead of the curve. They're one of the trendsetters of the industry in terms of getting the game online. So when I first started playing was probably like 98, and we would, Sunday night, internet was still kind of, shaky at that point, but
Sure.
Monday morning newspaper comes out, you're okay, hey, I got this many points from Chris Carter and Randy Moss and Mike Alstott and those guys.
Yep.
And you were doing it by hand. So yeah, CBS was one of the first sites to put it online. But yeah, it part of the reason why I never left doing fantasy or even tried was because every year there was like a new wrinkle. It was, okay, now we do these things called podcasts. Now we do these things called internet shows and things like that. And it just kind of kept changing and evolving, and it was just a lot of fun.
The obviously the competitiveness of your job. Let's talk a little bit about that. Do you there's peers at CBS. Do you compete with those peers? Do you guys kind of look at yourselves as a team? Do you even talk to each other? Is there communication between you guys?
It's definitely a team. We have a great team, and I think that's kind of the reason why we've been so successful as an organization, and why our fantasy site is among the leaders in the industry. So I've been with one colleague, Dave Richard, for the entirety of my tenure here. And then two other colleagues have been with us for the majority of that time as well. And that makes up our podcast, which is called Fantasy Football Today. You can find it wherever podcasts are available. There's my shameless plug. Adam Azer is our podcast host, and then Heath Cummings also does what I do. And so we obviously compete with ourselves in fantasy leagues, and obviously we want to be right more than the other guy. But I do think that the thing that makes us successful, and also makes our shows entertaining, et cetera, is that we don't have the same opinion. We're not robots. We're not plugged in the same way. My rankings are different than Dave's, than Heath's. Adam challenges us, on all of our, things that we, suggest, our recommendations, et cetera. So that is, I think what just makes a good team. But yeah, we
your picks are your picks though. When you make your picks.
Yeah, I don't sit there and, now we, you and I are we coach our kids' baseball teams together. We may say, hey, I think this guy's hitting better than that guy, and you may say something to me and I may say something to you that changes the other's opinion. It's just like that in our fantasy football discussions, so I may come at it with 10 stats and Dave may have an 11th stat that makes me say, oh, I didn't realize that, or vice versa, or something that, just the counterpoint. So like today, for example, we were discussing quarterback tiers for 2026, and Heath and I were on the show together with Adam, and Heath is much higher on Tyler Shuck, the quarterback for the Saints, and 6 reasons why. And it's like, maybe I do, I'm a little bit too low. Maybe it's something I need to reevaluate, so anything that makes you think.
And that example, what round did you have him going in like a 12 team?
So Tyler Shuck is probably not the best example. He's like a late round guy. No matter how much anybody's going to sell him, you're never going to be drafting him ahead of a Dak Prescott or a Caleb Williams or somebody else that has a high upside, sort of trajectory like Shuck does. But his history with his coach, or his coach's history, Kellen Moore, is pretty successful with quarterbacks. They're going to run a high, octane offense, and he showed some things as a rookie. So, anytime you hear those type of things that make you maybe jump him up a round or two, but he's really more of a guy that will be a late round flyer.
Late round pick.
Yeah.
Is there ever huge dispersions, like where you see a guy as like a second or third round pick and you really want to take that flyer? Is there a little ego that gets involved in doing that and trying to take those high flyers, so that if you are right, you're like, you're with the guy that knew DeMarco Murray when he came out was going to be, a first or second round pick, and you were able to steal him in the 9th?
You definitely have those, discussions and talking points that stick with you all season. So I'll give you one that you could probably relate to as a Dolphins guy. So Jalen Waddle leaves Miami, goes to Denver.
Yep.
Dave is very high on Jalen Waddle. I'm a little concerned because, again, this is where the stats come in. So they were 3rd or 4th in pass attempts, top 5 in pass attempts last year, Denver was. But they didn't really focus on 2 guys. Now they have 2 guys, right? They have Jalen Waddle and Courtland Sutton.
Yep.
Is one going to dominate targets over the other? They're still going to throw the ball as much. All those things come into play for me. Dave is looking at it as Jalen Waddle, when he hasn't had Tyreek Hill on the field, has been pretty special. So he's very excited to see Jalen Waddle there. I don't want to, give all of his information without him being here, but he's high on Waddle. I'm a little bit concerned. So that's probably one where we've gone back and forth since the signing or the trade 5 or 6 times. I'm sure that's one we'll track all season. We're never going to be like, oh, I was right, you were wrong. But in the back of our minds, I was right, you were wrong, or vice versa.
I mean, with a guy like Waddle, a lot has to do with, does he stay healthy or does he not?
Exactly.
Which he's just never been able to stay
There's
healthy.
a lot of factors that go into play. And so, I love the talent. I love the situation. Most receivers that change teams do well, but we'll see if, he has that high upside that Dave is kind of focusing on.
Where does Stephon Diggs go?
To me, the most likely landing spot and makes the most sense would be Washington. He played at Maryland. They could really use some help in the passing game to help Jaden Daniels. I think they were kind of in the Brandon Ayuk mix. And
isn't Ayuk? He's been streaming all day that he's a Commanders.
He's gone a little off the edge. I think he's too volatile to touch for almost any team at this point. So if they wanted to bring in a veteran that has some off-field issues of his own, I think Stephon Diggs to Washington makes just too much sense.
What's the day-to-day like for a fantasy football person? So, example, season ends, all right, Super Bowl's over. Do you take off until the draft, or it's really hard to analyze anything. There's not much you can do. People are not drafting for months on end. I'm guessing there's a quiet period for you.
It kind of goes in ebbs and flows. For me, for example, I do a lot of like NFL postseason coverage. So I'll do, there's like playoff challenges, things like that. So I'll pretty much stay busy through the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Just here's what you should, because I like the daily game as well. I'm a fantasy football addict.
Yeah.
If they ever have recovery for that, I'll probably need to go at some point. But I like to continue playing. So, I'll jump on DraftKings, FanDuel. We used to host our own postseason game. There are places where you can still play, fantasy postseason leagues. So I'll do it all the way through the Super Bowl, and I like to give content for that. You almost immediately start thinking ahead. Usually when you get to around that push from Thanksgiving through the end of the year, so it's the end of the regular season, your mind is already starting to think about the next season.
Sure.
So that kind of just continues that process. So we start to get, an idea of what our rankings are for the next year. You start to look toward free agency, toward the draft. I'm not the biggest college football. I don't follow college football to that level during the year because it's just too hard.
Sure.
So I'll start to, dive into the college players a little bit from, regular season to the draft. So it's a lot of looking ahead at that point. But really, for the most part, it goes from, I probably work on average about 100 hours a week. And then that goes back to, probably like a 40-hour week.
And during the draft, so are you analyzing the draft that night? Is it more just watching the players afterward? That night is not necessarily a big night or weekend per se.
Oh, it's a huge week. There's no actions that take hold right away. So depending on the type of leagues you play in, so dynasty leagues, for example, these are leagues where you have your roster year over year forever. And the way to supplement that is obviously the rookie. So rookie drafts will happen, immediately after the NFL draft in some cases. So you want to have those, those talking points, your analysis and your judgment of the players kind of right away. But it's really once they get on their teams, so as much as you may like a prospect or love a situation. So like Jeremiah Love, for example, was the first running back drafted. He went to a spot that has a lot of question marks. They just had signed Tyler Algier. They still have James Conner. Obviously, a lot of questions at the quarterback spot. But the talent is overwhelming. He could be amazing. Can he be amazing right away? So you kind of have to, have some instant analysis, and then you kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, now what do I really think? So it kind of goes hand in hand.
I remember Gordon, who's a backup for Miami. I remember when he came out of college, he was drafted. I want to say, was he 3rd round or 4th round, something like that?
Definitely a day 3 pick. Yep.
Yeah, and you just saw physically how good he can be, and it seems like no matter how much the NFL, how many hours they put in, they get a lot of these draft picks wrong. And your experience just following it for 20 plus years. Why is that? Why is it so hard to find out if a great college player is not going to turn into a great NFL player and vice versa?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to, there's a lot of different minds in those rooms, so what does the GM want? What does the coach want? What does the position coach want? Does that group stay together over the course of the player's career? So I think, I'll give you a story, a quick one. The Rams, when they got Cooper Kupp, or even Puka Nacua, both guys, those were not sought after wide receivers.
Yep.
And in the case of Cooper Kupp, the scouting group went to go look at, I forget who else it was, but on that Eastern Washington receiving core, and they're like, "Wow, that kick could play." And to a man, they were like, "Who's your best receiver in that program?" "Oh, it's Cooper Kupp. It's Cooper Kupp." You know, probably not the most dynamic prospect, but that staff from that moment was sold on him. They went back to the GM at the time, Les Snead, and they were like, "That's the guy we got to go get." And they're like, "Well, okay, how soon? When do we go get him?" And you see what he became. Puka Nacua, kind of the same thing. So I think if you get the right brain trust and they believe in that guy fitting that system and the coach being able to adapt certain situations, sometimes you see a player, Kalen Black, for example, just reading about this last night. So Kalen Black for the 49ers, rookie running back out of Indiana, very productive, 1,000 yards, had a great postseason, helping them win a national championship. Does he fit with the 49ers? Well, they think so because they drafted him sooner than anybody thought he would go. But sometimes, he's not Christian McCaffrey. He may not fit Kyle Shanahan's scheme. Shanahan's smart enough to adapt to it, but a lot of times it's just sometimes a team will draft a player and then the guy's fired the next year, and then that guy's kind of lost a little bit. So it's just one of those scenarios where you get 7 to 10 picks a year in most cases. You hope to hit on 3 of those.
And as far as like as you're concerned, as you do a draft, and let's just say in my draft we do a half a point per reception, right? League. Is there? Do you have like that automatic? I do not draft a quarterback in the first round. I do not draft a tight end in the first round. Like, what are your automatics almost every time? Obviously, some seasons might change, one player might change, but on average.
I try not to go in with anything, I won't do this, because if you do that, you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into passing on some great players sometimes. Unless, your league is probably going on for 5+ years, let's say.
It's going on for 20. Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the most part, a lot of the same guys.
Yep.
So you study numbers, you know what trends are, you know the trends for the most part of what the people you're drafting with.
Sure.
You have the benefit of history of that league. So I tend to lean on that more so than I would, okay, how is the industry telling me these people should be drafted? So if I know in my league everybody's going to wait on quarterbacks, do I jump in and take the best quarterback first? Because now I have a positional advantage more so than anybody else. To me, a draft is almost like a living organism. You kind of have to sort of play it as it unfolds. But generally, I have my styles that I like to. The way that I draft is kind of, for the most part, stagnant, with room to grow. So I usually wait on quarterbacks. Tight end is kind of the one that I kind of fluctuate the most with. But I think if you study it as much as I do, you kind of find where the values. It's kind of like the conversation we had today on our show. Tiers,
Yep.
you tier players.
Yep.
So you find those pockets of value. So like 3 quarterbacks I like a lot this year are Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
They're not in the top 2 tiers for the most part.
Who was it? Trevor Lawrence,
Justin Herbert,
Yep.
Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence.
Got it.
Those 3 guys I think can really stand out this year. Dak is coming off a good season. Trevor Lawrence ended last year great. And I love the setup of Justin Herbert with Mike McDaniel. So if I have an opportunity to sort of live in that range of quarterbacks, that gets me to 5 or 6 picks around those guys where I can, sort of manage the board. That's usually...
So, and in essence, you have these 3 guys, if you can get them in whatever that round tier is, let's call that 5 through 9, somewhere in that,
Sure.
that range. Like I can go after who I want to go after, and based upon who's already drafted that quarterback, I can wait on that and come back.
Right, but at the same time, if I know, again, 20 years of my league, and everybody's going to be waiting for Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Jackson Dart, all these, names that you're going to hear a lot of sleeper and breakout, excuse me. Why not take Josh Allen in the 3rd round or 4th round if he falls, luckily enough, or Lamar Jackson in that range, same thing, and just, okay, now I've gotten 2 or 3 guys that I love. I now have the best quarterback potentially, based on his history. I should be able to have an advantage in my league.
It's called an odd year for quarterbacks this year a little bit. Like you don't really see many going in the 1st and 2nd round like they have in the past.
We say that every year,
Yeah.
And then when we get to the data point that I lean on the most for draft talk is average draft position, so ADP.
Yep.
You'll get to drafts and everybody that's a novice, so you may, say to one of your coworkers, hey, let's start a fantasy league, or, when you neighbors
Sure.
or whatever,
Yep.
you've been doing this for 20+ years. Somebody's doing it for the first time. Why would I not take a quarterback? They're the best players, so if we can get past those first 2 rounds and no quarterbacks, I'll be happy, but I think we'll still get one in the first round.
Who is your we'll say wide receiver, running back, tight end, and quarterback? Who is your breakout this year? Like by far the best value, the guy that you can get later that you see tremendous upside, and who's one of those players that everybody's going to draft way ahead and is a complete bust and stay away from?
So quarterback, I'd probably go with Lawrence because I think the coach last year, Liam Cohen, he got great numbers out of Baker Mayfield 2024. Did great things with Lawrence last year. 9 rushing touchdowns is hard to replicate, but I think he'll run enough that'll help him. So again, a good guy you can get late that I think has finally the chance to put it all together for a full season.
Sure.
Let's see, running back, a guy that should break out. I like Omarion Hampton with the Chargers. Showed some things last year. Last season, they lost both their tackles. Rashawn Slater missed all the season.
Yep.
Joe Alt only played 6 games, excuse me. And I think Hampton with Mike McDaniel. Ironically enough, a guy I ran into in New Smyrna Beach, Raheem Mostert. He got 18 touchdowns out of Raheem Mostert with the Dolphins. And then we saw what he did with Devon Achane. So I think Omarion Hampton has a breakout season. Wide receiver, I'll just go with the most popular guy. It's Luther Burden for the Bears. He's going to be awesome. Just in the small.
You think he becomes the number one over
Rome Odunze?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I think there's 85 targets available after DJ Moore left. I hope the majority of that goes dispersed between him, Odunze, and Loveland. But
so who are you drafting first, Burden or?
I would actually draft Loveland first.
Yeah.
Just because I think he's going to be special at the tight end spot. But I think if the 2 receivers, I would take the chance on Burden. And then tight end, since we can't say Loveland, I won't go into the Bear. I think Tyler Warren, the sophomore for the Colts. They lose Michael Pittman and about 100 targets. And Warren, when Daniel Jones was healthy last year, was having a pretty special rookie campaign. So you love whenever you can get concentrated targets in an offense. And so they have Alec Pierce, who they paid. They have Josh Downs, and they have Tyler Warren. Those 3 guys are going to get fed.
As far as your breakout star, he's a top. He's gonna go in the first or second round, but by far just annihilate everybody. Who's that?
First round guy that's going to annihilate everybody. I mean, my number 1 overall player is Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yep.
So I think taking David Montgomery off the field. You saw a little bit last year, but you go back 2 years ago, Montgomery missed. I think it was 3 or 4 games at the end of the season. Gibbs was averaging over 32 PPR points per game. So half PPR is probably about 28. You don't get that very often. So it's between him and Bijan Robinson. There's this league that started about a week ago. It's called the Scott Fish Bowl League. It kind of like the kickoff to fantasy football season, at least in the industry. It's about 3,000 people that play in this league. And it's a very wide receiver driven league. And I had the second pick. I was taking Jahmyr Gibbs, no question. It's just one of those players. Like he could break fantasy this year.
And how many drafts are you personally doing yourself?
I generally do about drafts.
Yeah.
Or leagues.
Legitimate drafts where you're drafting a team in a league, right?
And I'm playing it out.
Yep. And then how many mock drafts do you do prior?
Oh, I'll do probably close to 100 mock drafts.
Okay.
Maybe more. I don't even count those. They just add up.
I would think that would be low for you.
Well, you got to figure we don't do them every day,
Yeah.
And really most drafts don't start till about the end of August or end of July, excuse me. So, it comes out to about 2 a day, I guess, or 3 a day, on average. So yeah, about 100 mock drafts.
Is that just with random people on the CBS site, kind of?
So we do, we'll do probably 2 to 3 a week for content purposes. So you saw me doing one at a restaurant in between games, So
so that was for content purposes.
That was for content purposes
Got
only. I play in about 25 to 30 leagues a year. And so I just have, like I said, I have a hard time saying no. So one of my colleagues was doing fantasy football and fantasy baseball. He's kind of really fully vested in fantasy baseball now. But he's still in analyst football league, and he texted our group and was like, "Hey, does anybody want to take this over for me?" And I think everybody's just kind of waiting for me to say yes, because that's usually what I did. So our baseball team may have practice tomorrow night, so I told him that's kind of contingent on if I could do the draft for him or not.
And as far as I've had these circumstances. Now, obviously, you're doing this every day, so there's probably not a rattle for you because you have your list. Your list has been set up. It's been analyzed. I'm not going to have that much time. I'm going to print out, obviously your list and your recommendations. I'm going to print out a couple other recommendations. I'm going to come up with some sort of list that I want to go, but it never goes perfect. And obviously you're on a clock and you're timed, right? So there's been times where I'll get flustered and I'll be like, oh my God, I was really planning on picking up running backs. I didn't get any of the running backs. Now I'm behind the gun on running backs and I get nervous and I get a little amped up. what's some advice you would give to that casual fantasy football person that's not the expert?
So I think you want to do a little bit of research before you just go into it. But again, most people don't have that luxury to just sit there and say, okay, I'm going to spend a week or, even a day or whatever the case may be, their lunch hour, preparing for it. You always want to kind of have a little bit of strategy. So I think tiers versus rankings, this kind of is gives you a little bit of advantage. If you can take a rank list and sort of make lines and say, okay, if I can get one of these guys here, I'll be happy. If not, I'll take one of these guys. If I have to take the last guy in the tier, at least I know I got one of the guys in my tier. It kind of helps you a little bit. So I think there's never really you should never panic. The biggest thing about fantasy football drafts versus the season, if you go back, you said you've been in your league, 20 plus years. How many times, if you think about it, the team that you drafted is the team you ended up with? The waiver wire. The waiver wire is huge. Injuries obviously play a huge part in this game, and so never walk away from your draft saying, "Okay, I'm stuck." If you can make trades, you can do this. If you don't have enough running backs, hopefully you got the right wide receivers. Hopefully maybe you have one or two quarterbacks. You trade one of them. Same with the tight end position. So I would never panic. But again, you don't want to just say, okay, here's the list and go into it. If you're really serious about the game, obviously people that do it for fun, I've had people that actually, I've gotten pictures, hey, somebody drafted you. And I'm like, drafted me? And they're like, yeah, because they printed out the list and your name was at the top and they thought they got a steal because they drafted you. So
Does CBS actually have you as a choice? Or
no, it was a live draft. People are putting stickers on the board.
Got it, live draft.
And somebody was a little inebriated, and they said, "Oh, look, I got the first player on the list." No, that's not what it is. So, do a little bit of research, but again, if you don't and you get stuck, don't panic.
Yeah. How like during these nights, these nights of these drafts for like the last 2 weeks before going into the regular season, are you guys like super slammed with kind of updating everything because there's injuries going on in training camp? There's obviously seeding. Somebody had a good game, somebody didn't. I'm guessing if you look at your draft board today versus what it's going to look like, 5 days before the draft, it's going to look severely different.
It definitely changes. Yeah. I mean, you hope that it doesn't change too much because you never know when people are drafting. You kind of want to be, honest to the entire customer experience, from beginning to end, so I don't want to sit here and, so I wrote this while we were away. It just got published today on Monday. My sleepers, my most updated sleeper list. I don't want to go back and say by the end of August that I changed my opinion so much because of something that I saw. Now injuries obviously, can alter that, but did somebody struggle so much that changed it? You kind of want to have a little bit of confirmation bias from training camp and certainly preseason games of, oh, that guy looked good. It just backs up my thoughts going into the whole process. But I have to step away from my rankings on the computer all the time because I'll stare at it and, oh, I like this guy better than that guy. It's like any board. This guy better. So like, for example, today, what's the July 13th, I have Jackson Dart ranked ahead of Caleb Williams. If we find out Malik Neighbors is going to miss 6 games, that's an easy switch, and I said this on the air today, so it's one that I go back and forth with. By the time somebody's listening to this, they may see Caleb Williams ahead of Jackson Dart, so it's just like, if I stare at it too much, I just keep moving guys around all the time.
Let's talk about kickers and defense. I believe kickers and defense wins championships.
Okay.
And I've won
championships. First person.
Huh?
You're the first person to say
it. And I'll tell you why. There's been many times where my team is great, but I look for the advantage in the kicker and the defense weekly. And if I get lucky and I draft a great defense, great, I'm going to play them a lot, right? But there's definitely opportunities. There's matchups. There's rain. There's wind. Are they playing indoor? Are they playing outdoor? And those factors. And you get a good kicker that scores you 13 points, 14 points versus one that scores you 3 points. That's a change in a win and a loss and you making the playoffs. How much emphasis do you have on drafting them? Do you want to even draft a kicker? I mean, I'll draft my kicker, but like I'm probably going to switch them a lot. Or, is there 3 or 4 kickers you're like, I don't care where they're playing, rain, wind, whatnot, I'm starting them.
There are, Brandon Aubrey for the Cowboys, Kaimi Fairbairn for the Texans, the guys that have a little bit of a track record. You look for guys that have indoor situations versus outdoor situations, part of good offenses versus bad offenses. defensive-minded kickers tend to lean more toward kicking. Defensive-minded coaches tend to lean more toward using their kicker versus offensive-minded coaches who will go for it on fourth down, for example. So there's certain things I think you come into play. I'm more along the lines of I think what you're talking about, where you're streaming kickers, you're streaming the position. Defense is a little bit different because most of the good ones are going to be locked up the majority of the year. On occasion you'll get a team that gets a great matchup, because the quarterback was injured or the running back was injured, the offensive line just stinks and they'll have an advantage that way. So it's a little bit harder with defenses because I think, again, the top 3 or 4 kickers, they get drafted, they get locked in, nobody changes those. Almost everybody else will shuffle out their kicker, So for defenses, it's kind of, I think you want to be a little bit smarter with it in terms of how you draft them. A lot of people, though, like to just go with the idea of, okay, who's got the best week 1 or 2 matchups? Can you get a little bit of an advantage that way and then maybe see if that carries over throughout the course of the year? So defense is a little bit different. You look for my first thing is the pass rush because that dictates everything else. I don't want to chase turnovers. That's too volatile of a stat. So
Sure.
The Rams, for example, are going to be very sought after this year, and they may go sooner than most defenses should go, especially if they end up signing Aaron Donald. But getting Myles Garrett was just such a huge advantage for them.
What's a reach? What round would be a reach on a 12-team, 15-round?
I would never probably take my defense before like the 11th or 12th round, in that situation. And for me, I'm never going to do that, but that's probably the earliest I would go.
And who would be your so Rams would be number 1. Who's your second and third?
Texans, I believe, are 2. Denver's up there. Seattle's up there. I'm trying to think if I missed anybody. Minnesota's up there. But it's Denver, Seattle. Denver, Houston. The Rams, Houston, and Denver would be my top.
Miami was actually interesting. Like last year, they looked like they had the rushers. They had they had Chubb and they had Jalen
and Chop Robinson
and Robinson and you go how and for whatever reason they just completely blew up and their draft value obviously just dropped after like 2 weeks.
I it's one of these situations. There's always going to be a defense coordinator that pops up out of nowhere. But if you find Minnesota getting Brian Flores and what he's done for that defense and Philly getting Vic Fangio and what he's done for that defense. These guys, for me, it's always been Jimmys and Joes versus X's and O's. The players usually dictate what you want to see. But some coaches are just magical. Ben Johnson on the offensive side, for example. These guys, what they do defensively is just incredible, sometimes. And so the 49ers last year, for example, they lost everybody defensively. And Robert Saleh still kept that group together and they were able to make a run. So it's going to be, I'm glad for the Rams, for example, that they kept Chris Shula because he's going to still do some wonderful things over there.
Yeah, no, he's got Shula in his last name, so he's awesome. As far as connections go, do you have like a source on each team? Like Adam Schefter obviously has sources, I'm guessing on every team. It's kind of interesting too. I wonder if he pays those sources. That's like unethical, and I'm guessing.
You hear stories not so much about Schefter, but some other people that, how they get their information. Most of that comes from agents.
Yeah.
It comes from teams, clearly. But, a lot of the stuff you see, it's depending how closely you follow it. So Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, the other, insiders, there's a reason why their stuff comes out almost simultaneously. It's because they're getting texts from
the same
people. Yeah. And so, as a former reporter, dabbling in that world, not to that level by any stretch. Those guys are
legends
amazing.
Of the game.
Yeah, they're amazing for a reason. I don't have sources on teams. I don't cultivate those relationships the way that I used to. The times and the people that I still connect with and reach out to is more of a secondary and third, second and third level type of personnel or source level at this point. So I have a few agents still that I talk to, some trainers. A lot of the stuff I get, though, because for what I need is from other reporters, so I'll reach out to them and say, hey, what are you hearing about this, that, and the other? And, just being around the team,
obviously most important things is injuries, depth on the, chart. It's not something that I guess you need to know right away, but
the industry has changed so much because of people like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and those guys. They give you this information, so Schefter is notorious Saturday night, his news dump at like midnight, so we would wait for that. I'm a night owl, so I wait for that all the time, and
why is that? Why is it only at midnight?
I don't know if that's when he reaches out to his sources. That's when he decides to report those things. Saturday in the NFL is kind of like the quiet day, and so for him, maybe that's time with his family. And so he's, put his kids to bed or, come back from going out to dinner with his spouse, and decides that's when he's going to do it. Um, for what we used to do, we've always had like an athlete on our show, or our insiders on our shows, and if I knew that person had a connection to somebody, hey, can you send a text? Can you, make a call? Can you find out did they make the trip, to the road game, because they would leave on Saturday. And so you try to use those relationships as much as you can. But for the most part, though, it's just, you're relying on these insiders at this point.
Historically, like if you had to remember, your number one bust, like the one that you were so high on and just was completely wrong and you got screwed. And then, and then conversely, that player that you told everybody to pick that just completely crushed it.
For years, and he continues to prove me wrong, so I just stopped saying it. Derrick Henry's going to fall off at some point. I mean, he's big, he's old, he's, broke his foot. He's going to, continue to father times undefeated, all these things. And year after year, I just, last 2 years, I stopped. It's like, what's the point? If he's going to break down, he's going to break down. You try to rank him appropriately, but, he's somebody that, for a couple of years I was.
It's actually like, I mean, I don't know if it's you, but it's like the minute these running backs turn 30 years old, you got to.
So I used to do, and I still do, obviously, the data on 30-year-old running backs. Last year for me was a big one that I got right, was Saquon Barkley. So the history of 2,000-yard rushers, small sample size, small group, they had fallen off on average about 500 to 800 yards. I'm sorry, fallen off about 800 yards the following year. And, some of that was injury related. Terrell Davis had his 2,000-yard season, then didn't come back next year. So, and then the history of guys with all that work. So this year, for example, Christian McCaffrey's coming off a 450 touch season. He makes me really nervous. Now, a lot of it was what he does in the passing game, so hopefully that's still okay.
But like you got to also imagine thousands of touches prior to the season too.
The wear and tear on his body is incredible.
Yeah.
So he's somebody that makes me nervous for that statistical reason. But Derrick Henry was probably the biggest flop. And then one that I always liked that I got right was before Aaron Foster broke out with the Texans. So he was. One of the nicest guys. I used to do this a lot. I don't do it as much anymore, but I would spend time in the offseason. I would call every NFL team, and I would make a list of the guys I want to talk to. So I would call every NFL team, and I'd say, hey, can I speak to this, that, and the other? You probably get about a 50% success rate on them saying, oh, yeah, sure. We'll set you up with this guy or whatever. And so Foster, I'm supposed to do an interview with him. My uncle had passed away that day, and I was like, listen, I can't do it today. Okay, no problem. We'll reschedule. Nice enough to reschedule. Call me back. First thing, I'm sure the PR guy told him, but whatever, it always just sticks with me. Hey, sorry we couldn't connect earlier. Sorry about your uncle. I'll never forget that.
Yeah,
he didn't have to say that at all. Could have been like, hey, yeah, let's talk. So getting that guy right, he had already broken out at this point, but getting that guy right, you just see like, oh yeah, he's got an opportunity, team successful, blah blah blah. So, that's one that I think will always stay with me.
We're gonna end it with the Dolphins because it's fun to talk about the Dolphins. Achane.
Is it really fun to talk about that?
I'm that guy that every time that the new regime comes in, I'm excited, and I'm anticipating this regime looks good. But again, they're finally doing what I felt like they should have done years ago, which is a true house cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like they're on the right path. So we'll see we'll see if first of all, is Malik Willis the starting Dolphin quarterback in 3 years from now?
No.
Okay, so so good contract they signed him to then.
Great contract.
Yeah. And Achane, he's a little guy. He looks like he's going to break down like at some point. They're going to run him into the grave. Like, I don't even know why they re-signed him. I mean, they probably could have gotten something pretty good for him at this point. Would you have kept him if you were, considering what the team looks like today? And secondly, like, is he draftable?
Oh, he's 100% draftable. I mean, it's a matter of when you want to buy into it. So, the pro Achane fantasy analyst will tell you there's been plenty of guys on bad teams that have had success, especially with his profile as a pass catcher. The anti-Achane people will tell you that he's got a quarterback who's going to run as opposed to dump it off. He's got a coach that's not necessarily going to feature him in the passing game like his previous coach. And then they're on a, team that may not win very many games, which typically lends itself to not scoring very much. I'm more in that camp than the pro Achane camp. But I do think in round 2, he's a good gamble. When you start to stack him up to Ashton Genty on a bad team, or Amari Hampton, who I like but is unproven, or Josh Jacobs, who's 28, all those things, those running backs in that range. Derrick Henry, who's 31 years old. So he's in that range of guys, kind of like 8 through 10. But would I have signed him? No, I probably would have tried to trade him and just continue to stockpile draft picks, because when this team is good, he may not still be elite at that position, because as you alluded to, running backs at 30 tend to tail off. You start to see it at 27, and that's about the age he'll be, is when I think the next quarterback and hopefully the roster is built up. But I agree with you. I think they did the right thing in tearing it down, and they made their run, with Chris Greer and with Mike McDaniel, and trying to say, okay, this is the push, the tank for Tua, and did they get the right guy? Probably not. Did they screw up the Flores situation? Probably so. Was McDaniel on the doorstep, and then some things didn't go his way? They made their push, and now I think doing the right thing. It's hard, because if it was maybe a long championship run or a Super Bowl ring mixed in there from Marino till now, you're talking 27 years of people waiting and wanting and hoping and all those things. And so you'd like to see a reward at some point. You obviously are a Dolphins lifer. I used to be a Dolphins fan, so I see it, somewhat, not from afar, because I live in South Florida, but
Do you consider part of your job as you can't be a true fan of a team?
not this job, my previous job.
Yeah.
So when I covered the Dolphins,
Yeah.
and I'll give you a fantasy related story to that. So I learned this covering the Gators. You go to a college, you obviously want to root for the team that you're associated with. And they made it very clear to us, you cannot root for the Gators if you're in school here covering teams. So, okay, I'm a young, impressionable person. I try to take my orders and follow them. So, didn't root for them. And then got to covering the Dolphins. And here I am, the biggest Dan Marino fan growing up. And now I'm standing right in front of him on a day-to-day basis and trying not to be a, fan, so had to learn that. But I'm covering a Dolphins game. I'm in the far end of the press box. So there's literally a wall next to me, and they're scoring. So I'm on my right. They're scoring to the left. I'm the only person that's looking this way. No one's looking at me. I have Randy McMichael on my fantasy team. He catches a touchdown, and I do this, and I go literally with my hand, and I do a fist pump, and I put my hand down, because I'm like, I can't cheer in the press box, but I'm cheering for my fantasy team. So it was like one of those things where I had to realize where I was. So I hope to see the Dolphins turn this around and become a successful, at least a competitive franchise consistently. I think, bringing in the Green Bay Brain Trust, they have such a successful tenure. Again, not always winning Super Bowls, but they have a couple. So hopefully it works out. I think there's a lot of young, talented players on the roster. If you get the quarterback right, you'll be fine. If not, you're going to be in trouble. So does Malik Willis win enough games that they, price themselves out of the Arch Manning, sweepstakes? Then that's the question.
That's your number one quarterback coming out.
At least for now, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see how this all shakes out.
Yeah.
College football season's always topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
But do they get the right guy in place? And if they do, they spent 3 picks on receivers. Achane will hopefully still be successful for another, 3 to 5 years, you hope, at least at a potentially dominant level. And then I think the defense will get built up enough. But really it's about, at this point, establish the trenches, get a quarterback in place, and maybe find a receiver that you can, either trade for, draft, or, build from within.
Sounds good. One more, just because I got to put you on the spot. You got to name one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, and one tight end that you were not going to pick early. You were just staying away from. You do not want them. They're going to be ranked high. Stay away from them.
I'll say Josh Allen, just because he'll be too expensive. Christian McCaffrey, because of his age. Devontae Adams, because of his age.
Devontae Adams, you think goes early, huh?
Oh, I guess you want early.
Yeah, I want one of those like top 10 guys that you're like, nope, just stay away from them.
George Pickens is making me a little bit nervous, just because I don't think he does that again.
Okay.
Tight end would probably be McBride. I don't think McBride does it again. So I obviously love Trey McBride. He's amazing.
2 good years in a row.
2 very good years in a row. But now you have a run game. They didn't have it last year. I think Marvin Harrison actually steps up and plays a little bit better this year, plus Michael Wilson, what he did last year. And then I'm concerned that at some point they turn from Jacoby Brissett to Carson Beck, and that kind of gives him a little bit of step back.
Excellent. Jamey, pleasure having you. How can the fans reach you? Not reach you, but at least see what you do.
Yeah, you can check us out. CBS Sports is where you can find almost everything that we do. Our podcast is fun. It's entertaining. It's informative. It's a fantasy football take. You can find that wherever podcasts are available, YouTube as well. But all of our written content's on CBS Sports.
Excellent. Thank you. Have
Thank
a good
you.
one.
My pleasure.
FABA for advisors by advisors. Hosted by Evan J. Mayer, where the real ones talk business, no filters, no favors. How they structure, they practice, how they build their team. Independent route or employee machine. Talk platforms, payouts, culture and growth. What really works when you out there on the road? No canned lines, just advisors being straight. Real conversations from the people who relate. Double podcast for advisors by advisors.